Let's start with the subjects of international law. We have said that in our last class we were talking about treaty law, and we have studied that Vienna Convention on the Law of Treaties 69 is regulating how to make treaties, and it only considers states, the agreements done in between states. What we know is that today, states also conclude agreements with intergovernmental or international organizations. Or those organizations conclude agreements with each other. Like NATO can make an agreement with EU, for instance, and so on. So agreements can be done also in between organizations. The thing is that, first of all, who's a state? Secondly, who's an organization? We have to name them. Because, for instance, Daesh, they call them Islamic State.
Well, they have called them a state and we can make agreements with each other. Is it the case? Catalonia is a state at the moment. Can we start making agreements? So first of all, what we're talking about in this class is legal
personality. Legal personality is easy in municipal law, actually. We know that individuals they have their legal personalities from birth to death. What else? Companies have legal personalities. They have their own stamp. They can conclude contracts with each other. States institutions and public corporations, they can also make agreements with each other. If you remember, we have given that example that this university can make a contract with the Ankara municipality. This university can also make a contract with a construction company for a new building. So this is what's happening in municipal law. As for international law, who is a subject of the state, of international law? Those that can have rights and duties, that can have obligations, that are capable of fulfilling their obligations, are subjects. First of all, what we know is that the subject of international law is an entity. It can be an individual. It can be a state. That can be an international organization, multinational company. It has to be recognized or accepted. It has to be capable of possessing and exercising rights and duties. And it can follow its obligations under international law. So this is a definition done by a scholar. We should also refer to legal sources to decide what are the sources of international law. Actually, let's start just with statehood, what a state is, before we talk about intergovernmental organizations or international organizations. What we know is that to become a state, you need some territory. At the moment, there is no terra nullius left. Terra nullius is a piece of territory which is not occupied by anyone. No one's sovereignty is on that territory. So to start a new state, then you have to find some territory first of all. The colonization process has ended. So that was huge India. That was a colony of England. And later, after British left the country, we have seen Pakistan becoming a state, Bangladesh becoming a state, Nepal, and so on. The colonization, that came to an end. We have seen actually new states emerging after the collapse of Soviet Russia, after the collapse of Yugoslavia. Or there used to be West Germany, East Germany. At the moment, we're just talking about one Germany. Or there was one Czechoslovakia. At the moment, there's one Czech and Slovakia. So new states are somehow emerging still, even though there is no terra nullius left, even though decolonization came to an end. After the collapse of Yugoslavia especially, new states have emerged, and the rest of the world was puzzled if we should recognize Croatia as a state or not. Should we recognize Bosnia and Herzegovina as a state or not? Kosovo, Macedonia. So in order to decide who's a state, we needed some guidelines. At that point, there are two sources that we can refer to. In those sources, at the moment, you're going to learn the criteria for statehood. Actually, those are the most basic criteria. They still do not promise the entity to become a state. According to Montevideo Convention of 33, this is one of the oldest agreements that we use in this class. Normally, our sources date back to latest 40s, 45, 46, so aftermath of the Second World War. According to Montevideo Convention, to establish a state, the basic criteria are population, territory, government, and capacity to enter into relations with other states. We still need some definition to all those articles. Yes, ma'am.
Is the last part related to the recognition part?
Don't count to recognition yet. We're just talking about statehood criteria. I'll come to that. This used to be the map. Turkey, Greece, Bulgaria, and Yugoslavia. And this is what has happened to Yugoslavia. New states. Actually, Vojvodina is at the moment a part of Serbia. Don't be confused by that. Montenegro, Kosovo, Macedonia. Albania was always a sovereign state. How to recognize them? First of all, the first criteria was trying to find out if they have a territory. Yes, they have one piece of earth. Secondly, do they have population? They have. And the government criteria. And that criteria does not say that they must have a democracy, republic, it must be. No, it's not mentioned. You can have a monarchy or you can have whatever you want. The most important thing is that there is an administrative network they used to have. Then, do they have that capacity to enter into relations? Actually, this is directly related to having a government. If you have an effective government, then the government is capable of conducting its foreign relations as well. This is how the basis was set. Still, in order to decide if those states can become states, can be recognized as states or not, a conference was set. And as a result of that conference, Arbitration Commission they have published their decisions about statehood. And this is quite similar to what you have seen in Montevideo Convention 33. It again mentions the territory, population, subject to an organized political authority, which means a government, and it is sovereign. Then it can become a state. At that point, you can still start asking questions then, what population means, how much, what territory means, and how big should that be? So population has to be a permanent population. It can be a small number of population, or it can be as huge as China, Russia, doesn't matter. There are small states in Pacific known as Nauru, Tuvalu, Vanuatu. They're all sovereign states. They have very small population, but that's permanent. They're living all the time on that piece of territory. So minimum number of inhabitants is not important. The emphasis is on permanence. That population is permanently on that piece of land. This is first thing. Secondly, territory. In time, you'll see that actually international law is very concentrated on territory. Territory is the basis of entire international law. It's important to have a certain band of territory to become a state, but your state can have certain border problems. As long as there is a defined band of territory, it is the minimum criteria to become a state. So border problems, clashes is also okay, like the state of Israel. And what does it mean to have a certain band of territory? Either you're able to talk about your state borders by given natural objects like those mountains and that river, or that certain band of territory, you can also define it through longitudes and latitudes, all right? That's also general address of your territory. So this is what it's meant by the certain band of territory. And a geographical unit is definitely not sought. What does that mean? Greece has one mainland, plus it has many islands around. That's completely acceptable to become a state. Turkey, one piece is in Asia, the other piece is in Europe. So it is split in between two continents. Still, it can become a state. Which country is that? Japan is composed of multiple islands. So having multiple islands is also completely acceptable to become a state, just like, which one? Indonesia, true. It's also composed of multiple islands. We're also familiar with the United States. It has two mainlands. Here is Alaska, and here is the United States, as you know. Plus, we can talk about Hawaii Islands. So it has two mainlands plus islands. That's also completely okay. So having a certain band of territory does not mean that it has to be all together in one certain place. No, geographical unity is not sought. To become a state, you need territory. How to find territory is complicated. You can invade, perhaps. You can conquer new lands. You can make discoveries, right? If you get on your ship, start searching. Well, that time is over, actually. Discoveries cannot happen anymore. Invasion can't be done. Can you invade new lands? No, use of force is completely prohibited by international law. You cannot attack other states. It's their own state, so it is one state. They're not trying to establish state. You need terra nullius. You need a piece of land on which no sovereignty is found. It is not impossible to find it. Actually, we have spoken about the Soviet Union. We have spoken about the Yugoslavia. So states exist, they also disappear in time. And once they disappear, then terra nullius comes forth. Then a new state can take place. Well, at the moment, we don't have any terra nullius around the world. What?
Except for two little pieces, right?
Which two little pieces you mean?
I think it's,
Antarctica or what?
yeah, a piece of Antarctica and also in between Egypt and Sudan, the Birtaville Sphere.
Ah, that part. Well, actually, we need to address them separately. Actually, they have still some explanation, Antarctica as well. Well, at the moment, we know that there are many entities that are fighting to become a state. And there is no terra nullius left. We'll come to that. Actually, establishing a new state is not completely impossible. There are certain conditions. Let's mention having a government. One of the criteria was having a government. Actually, what's meant here is having an administrative network. Your state has to be capable of collecting taxes, for instance, holding registrations of individuals who is born, who died. For your property, it is necessary to hold registrations, of course. Does that apartment really belong to you or what? And once you're here, then you have to prove the state that those are my ancestors and this apartment is left to me by them. So the state has to be capable of holding records of their citizens, bringing services, establishing schools. Well, the buildings, plus educating teachers for these students, hospitals and doctors in the same way, and many other services of the state. They have to be able to reach all veins of that state, plus that state also has to be capable of reaching foreign states. So sending ambassadors and conducting foreign relations. The form of government is actually not relevant. It can be a monarchy. That can be a republic or whatever it is. All of the government types are okay as long as the administrative network can be sustained. We always talk about sovereignty. Sovereignty is directly related to the territory, plus it is related to government. First of all, you have to have a territory. You can exercise your sovereignty over your territory. Plus, you need a government so that the government can control their domestic affairs and there's no higher authority. No one is imposing what to do with their internal affairs or external affairs. So having a government and so having a territory, they're directly related to sovereignty principle of international law. And why is that important, be sovereign? Well, for instance, municipalities have their population, they have their territory, right? And they have their voters. If sovereignty was not the principle, then Melih Gökçek could simply say that, well, okay, then I'm the king of Ankara. This is my state. But there's a higher authority than Ankara municipality. So Turkish state, it has a government, head of state and cabinet and parliament. Therefore, municipality has its administrative network. Municipality has one top leader. It has a population. It has territory, but it is not sovereign. Therefore, municipalities cannot become states. So, state is the highest authority, and nothing can be imposed upon states. No, yes, please.
My question is that, for example, there are some countries that are not recognized by some other countries. So, according to international law, can we see them as a subject? For example, I recognize them, but another country doesn't recognize them.
We'll come to that. We haven't spoken about recognition yet.
Okay.
All right? Well, what we have mentioned until now is a basic criteria for statehood. You need a territory, you need a government, you need a population, and you're capable of conducting your foreign relations. Still, this does not promise becoming a state. This is only necessary for identification. What you come across with an entity, is that a clan? Is that a warlord and that's family? Or is that a state? So the first criteria is what you're looking for. Secondly, the nations have the right for self-determination. To become a state, self-determination right has to be exercised. The thing is that, well, this is a right which has its limitations. Self-determination right is a very limited right. First of all, when nations decide under which state to live, this is roughly what self-determination is. Nations can decide to live under one certain state. Nations can also decide to establish their own state and governance. This is self-determination, roughly. How is it in Turkish? Kendi kaderini tayin hakkı. Okay. So, after the nations find those places and population and governance, they also have to be capable of conducting their or exercising their self-determination right. Self-determination right is actually a right that came to surface during decolonization. Our example was India. The Muslims living in India, they have decided to have their own state. They have found the territory, they have moved to the northern part of India. And they have established Pakistan. And there was no higher authority than Pakistan. They have used their self-determination right. That's what Bengalis have done. Nepal has done this as well. So decolonization, during decolonization, self-determination right was effectively used. And after decolonization, how can this right be performed? Well, it depends on certain conditions. In order to be able to use self-determination right, the nation has to make sure that it is not behaving against territorial integrity of another state. Sovereignty includes territorial integrity. So the nation that is willing to use its self-determination right has to respect the territorial integrity of other sovereign rights. What else? The nation that is willing to establish its own state to use its self-determination right has to make sure that it is not endangering sovereignty of another state. It is not disturbing sovereignty of another state. So, self-determination right has to be used on a terra nullius, on a piece of land on which no one's sovereignty. What you have learned through Montevideo Convention and Yugoslavia Arbitration 91 are the basic criteria of statehood. And still, in addition to all those criteria, self-determination rights implementation is sought. And how it can be used is important. We have seen the Catalonian case. In Catalonia, we have seen that they have conducted a referendum. They have asked 2 questions. And the answer was yes. And still, Catalonia did not become a state. Why?
They
Yes.
conducted unofficial referendum. It was not accepted by the
Still, what does it mean? What's an unofficial referendum?
Madrid, which is the base of where every, let's say, decisions have to be made or accepted or signed that, okay, we give the right to do this. It was not signed or let them to do this. So they made it without any, without the government actually accepting.
Very good point, actually. The first thing that we can discuss is that that referendum was not held all around Spain. Who was asked was just those people living in Catalonia. And probably the referendum's outcome would be different if the question was asked all around Spain. Secondly, what your friend has mentioned is the authorization of the central government. If the central government is okay with the new state, it can be established. So the consent of the central government is sought. Territorial integrity is absolute until the decision of the central government. If the central government says that, okay, for instance, it was also the case for Iraq. If you remember, in northern Iraq, a referendum was held. The referendum was held only on the northern part, not entire Iraq. But if one day the central Iraqi government says that we show consent for splitting our territorial integrity, northern part can be named somehow else, a new state can be established there, that would be completely legal. So the consent of central government is necessary at that point. Or we know that states can also disappear. States can also stop existing. If this happens in Spain, in Iraq, then self-determined, because we have seen that Yugoslavia used to exist, then it disappeared. Soviet Russia used to exist, then disappeared. So if the state disappears, then self-determination right can be exercised.
Can I have a question?
Sure.
For example, when USSR split it, there were still countries that existed within the USSR even before the USSR started.
True, that was a confederation actually, that's
Exactly.
true.
So after it disappeared, let's say, there were still states that became sovereign because they wanted to become sovereign after the USSR split it. So how can that be the making a new state right after the USSR split, like the Armenia case, for example?
That was a confederation. USSR was a confederation. States used to exist, and they have showed consent to share powers with a central authority. And later, what was disappearing was actually that central authority. And they have turned back to their individual identities.
So does
That's
it
how
give
it.
the right to make a self-determination thing at that?
Yes, yes. We have seen actually many different cases as well. Actually, after the Dritte Reich, after the Third Reich came to an end, there was no government in Germany anymore. But Germany existed somehow, right? So there are actually many curious cases in history. How did that take place? Or how could Croatia become a state? Was that always there in that portion of land as a distinct nation? Or were they, for instance, people discuss if they were ethnically different? Is religion is the key for that? Well, in literature we can come across with diverse discussions about that, about the limitations of self-determination right as well. How did that take place? Well, the most important thing you have to keep in mind at the moment is that self-determination right is a limited right. It cannot function as secession. It has to respect territorial integrity, it has to respect sovereignty of other states, and decision, consent of central governments may change everything. Or states exist and states disappear. We learned it through the Yugoslavia arbitration of 91. There, it is openly written that states can also disappear. So if states disappear, then we find terra nullius. And if we find terra nullius, then a new state, so self-determination right, can be exercised. Well, we have learned about the minimum criteria. So you know that at the moment you cannot have something floating on the sea or in the air and you name it, this is my country and I'm the queen of my island. This cannot happen. First of all, you need a concrete piece of land. You cannot be floating in the sea. You cannot be floating in the air. Secondly, if you buy a private island and you name yourself the queen of your island, still, I mean, do you have the capability to enter into foreign relations? Perhaps you have a huge family, then you can send people as ambassadors. Now you know about the criteria actually, how to become a state. And you have learned about how to use that self-determination right. And let's say you have fulfilled everything. Then recognition is the third step. Actually, those minimum criteria and self-determination right, they can be governed by, or they are governed by international law. Recognition is not governed by international law. Recognition is a political act. It's a political decision. We can talk about Abkhazia or Ossetia. They used to be actually a portion of which country? Which country? Georgia, that's true. And later, how did they split? Do you remember that part?
Russian invasion.
Good.
And they became de facto independent.
True, they have gained their independence through the invasion of Russia. Georgia does not accept this. Georgia says that, okay, at the moment, they meet the minimum criteria. They have their own territory, they have population, they have government. But Georgia says that still they cannot use their self-determination right because this is disrespectful against my territorial integrity. This is disrespectful against my sovereignty. And Russia has recognized Ossetia, of course. How do you explain it? Russia can do it. Russia can declare anyone. No, don't laugh. I mean, this is a political act. That's why. Politically, it is for the best interest for Russia. So they simply decide to recognize a state. And what does it mean to recognize a state? Recognition is the key of diplomatic relations. Once recognition takes place, then diplomatic relations, embassies and consulates can be opened. Ambassadors are sent. And diplomatic relations start. Sure.
For example, if one country recognizes the other country but do not recognize one part of that country, so what happens in that case?
Well, what happens in that case is that recognition is a political will. So the sender countries' perception is such a way, and they have to solve it through their diplomatic relations then, because it has already recognized, right? There is no obligation to recognize states. There is no international legal source that says that you must recognize states under those conditions. No state can be forced for recognition. The thing is that states want to have diplomatic relations with each other. They want to have trade relations, they want to have cultural relations, they want to have educational relations, economic, monetary, financial, whatever. They want to have relations with each other. Therefore, they opt for recognition. And once a state is given observatory status by the United Nations, this does not push other UN states to recognize that state, for instance. Or your country becomes a part of a multilateral treaty. And one state that your state does not recognize also signed that treaty. This does not mean that your country has now recognized that country. No, you can share a treaty and still treaty sharing, becoming members of the same treaty, does not mean that your country has recognized it. Recognition is diplomatic relations. Once you start your diplomatic relations, then this is recognition. You can declare that, your state can declare that it recognizes one state, or it doesn't need an extra recognition. They just start exchanging their diplomats and embassies. This is also recognition. Yes, please.
For instance, my question is, at what extent recognition entails, for instance, if a state recognizes another state, does it recognize all rights of the other states? I mean, the capital state, the borders, or other international
Yes.
requirements?
Because of sovereignty, of course. If the state is sovereign, there is no higher authority about that. Then the state decides upon which which city is their capital, and how to use their resources and so on.
But this is the case of the Israel.
Recognition is a one bullet gun. Once you recognize, and that's it. And then things can change in that country. You can start protesting. You can find something not okay. And through your diplomatic relations then, you continue sending your decisions, opinions, sharing. But recognition is only used once. That's a one bullet gun. One more thing, recognition, well, nothing obliges states to recognize each other in international law, but in history we have seen Security Council decisions that make some states withdraw their recognition. One example of this is Pakistani case. After the Turkish Cyprus was established, the Northern Cyprus, Pakistan has directly recognized the state, and Security Council has warned Pakistan. Then Pakistan has stopped recognizing it. It has withdrawn. Well, the recognition was again a huge question mark in 1990s after Yugoslavian case, and therefore European community has taken an initiative to talk about what recognition is once again. And well, they have then reached the very same results that we have mentioned at the moment, that it is a political necessity. Recognition is a political necessity, political decision. And as long as those decisions are performed under the UN Charter, for instance, then it's completely okay. Trusteeship Council is also another important element. You're not quite familiar with Trusteeship Council because last time it was active, it was year 1994. Since then, it is an inactive body, inactive organ of the United Nations. United Nations is composed of 6 main organs. I guess we have mentioned it in this class. Secretariat, the ICJ, the Security Council, the General Assembly, ECOSOC, and Trusteeship Council. Trusteeship Council is there. It is still one of the organs, by the way. It is just inactive, so it's not conducting its annual meetings anymore. But if that necessity arises once again, then Trusteeship Council can be activated by the United Nations. Trusteeship Council has helped those states to establish their own state when they have their legitimate self-determination rights. After decolonization, that was a necessity. We have seen in the map all those small islands in Pacific, for instance. France and England and Dutch, they have left those islands, and those islands were willing to become sovereign states. The thing is that they needed that knowledge to how to administer a country, how to collect taxes, how to hold registers, and how to spread services all around the country. Trusteeship Council has helped those entities becoming a state. That was the role of Trusteeship Council, and after the state was fully established, then the trust has left the country, of course, and the sovereignty of that state started. Statehood can extinct. We can see mergers, we can come across with absorption, annexation. This can happen with consent, without consent. With a merger, perhaps I have some slides related. Yes. In 1990, we have witnessed the unification of North and South Yemen. In 1990, we have observed the German reunification. East and West Germany came together to establish the German state that we know today. Or in 1993, Czechoslovakia has saluted. It has split into 2 countries. So that's also possible, that states merge or dissolute. States have their rights. States are equals before international law. And states are independent entities. There is no higher authority above them. States have the right for peaceful coexistence. States can become protectorates, or they can become protected states, or they can also be federal states. I'll talk about them one by one. Actually, perhaps we better leave protectorates to the end, and we start with federal states. You're already quite knowledgeable about federal states. And for instance, you know how United States is, how Germany is. Do I have them? In Switzerland, that's true. There are 50 states, right, in United States. And, well, they are sovereign in their domestic affairs. But once we start foreign relations, our counterpart is always Washington, D.C., the government over there. Or that's also the case for Germany. Well, all those states are powerful individual states in their domestic affairs. So, well, Bayern, for instance, it has its own prime minister. It has its own parliament. Where? In Munich. That's true. In Baden-Württemberg, that's the case. In North Rhine-Westphalia, that's the case. What's the capital of North Rhine-Westphalia? Which one? Nope. Düsseldorf. There's a parliament over there, and they have a prime minister as well. But once Turkey starts its foreign relations with Germany, Turkey is not trying to get in touch with those states one by one. The counterpart is directly living in Berlin, right? So this is the case with federal states. There can be states in that sovereign state. They are free in their internal affairs. They decide on their own education policy, for instance. But in their foreign affairs, then our counterpart is their capital. We can talk about sui generis territorial entities. What does sui generis mean? Unique. What else? Nevi şahsına münhasır. People laugh at that sentence. Most of people are not knowledgeable about that sentence. Well, it is one of its kind, then sui generis entities. Among sui generis entities, we come across with states like Taiwan, like Vatican, like North Cyprus. We can talk about condominiums. We can talk about Germany in 45. I guess I have them among my slides. Germany in 45. As you see, after the war, after the defeat of Germany, the Germany was then controlled under 4 different territories by USSR, by British, by French, and the US. That was a sui generis way of, well, Germany was still Germany, but it was controlled under 4 different territories. A condominium, do you know what it is? Normally, one territory, one sovereignty. One piece of territory, one sovereignty can be on that territory. In condominiums, there is one territory but multiple sovereignties. And this has taken place once condominium is established in between El Salvador, Honduras, and Nicaragua. Which continent is that? Central America, Middle America, Central America. That's good, okay. So normally we can talk about that 12 miles thing, but because of the geography, when they measure their 12 miles, 6 miles, whatever it is, they have seen that there is an area where they cannot find out where the sea borders are. And they have asked the ICJ, International Court of Justice, to solve out this sovereignty problem. ICJ couldn't. So they have called this piece of land a condominium, where we can talk about one territory, but multiple sovereignties exercised over that. At the moment, we don't have international territories, but this was one of the options that was discussed for the case of Jerusalem. If Jerusalem shall be announced as an international territory, that all nations, religions, all citizens have equal rights there, and they can enjoy being there. Taiwan is a sui generis entity. Well, China claims that Taiwan is a piece of their own country, and Taiwan says that they're independent. And it is just recognized by 23 countries. The thing is that Taiwan has, all around the world, tourism bureaus that act like embassies, and the rest of the world has strong trade relations with Taiwan. So this is also another sui generis state. I want to talk about Vatican. This is very distinct. Vatican and all those. You can find an embassy of Vatican, for instance, in Ankara. Yeah. Okay, so it's recognition, diplomatic ties. This is how you can follow it. The thing is that all those people living there, including the Pope, where does he come from, the Pope? His citizenship is not from Vatican, and he's the leader of Vatican. So it doesn't have a permanent population. Those people living there are not always direct citizens of Italy or Vatican. So actually Vatican does not even fulfill the basic criteria under such conditions, but it's a state. And it has a small arm of 100 people, and so on. Well, it has a government, it has a territory, but as you know, first of all, what we seek is a permanent population. It doesn't exist, but it's a state. So this is another interesting case of statehood.